and welcome to WION World is One. You're watching a special co-production of the WION-VOA show with me, Priyanka Sharma. Let's get started. Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi wraps up his tour of the South Pacific this weekend, but there is growing concern now across Australia, New Zealand and the United States about Beijing's increased engagement in the region. Analysts believe that it's part of China's effort to block a U.S. military response to a possible invasion of Taiwan. Our next report brings you all the details. Take a look. Report, or rather meeting, with leaders of 10 nations. Pacific Island leaders agreed that China's proposal needs to be discussed regionally before any discussions or decisions are made. According to documents seen by Reuters and AFP, Beijing is offering police training, cybersecurity assistance and marine mapping in exchange for access to natural resources and greater political cooperation. The Solomon Islands reached a security pact with Beijing in April. On Tuesday, US President Joe Biden met with the New Zealand Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern, and then on Thursday, Australia's newly installed Foreign Minister Penny Wong met with the Samoan Prime Minister Fiam Naomi Matafa.
I want to be very clear with you, there is a lot of bipartisanship in the relationship.
The Minister of Foreign Affairs was here, and there was this particular proposal from the Chinese that they were seeking regional agreement on. So our position was that you cannot have regional agreement when the region hasn't met to discuss it, and to be called in to have that discussion and have an expectation that there would be a comprehensive decision or outcome was something that, you know, we could not agree to. So I think the region has come to that conclusion that, you know, we need to meet as a region to consider any proposal that's put to us by our development partners that requires a regional agreement.
Regional security is an issue for the Pacific family. We have consistently taken the view that what sovereign nations do, and sovereign nations are sovereign, but ultimately have the potential to affect the nature of the security arrangements and of the region. So having a collective consideration of those matters is important.
We have more work to do in those Pacific Islands as well. I mean, and so we talked at length about in the past about my trip to Japan and Korea, and then dealing with the Quad, and so I think there's a lot of opportunity
to
make the world safer.
And joining us now with more analysis is VOA correspondent Jessica Stone. She's live with us from Washington, D.C. Jessica, thanks for joining us. This week, the U.S. and Taiwan announced a free trade agreement. What can you tell us about the details and, more broadly, the political significance of this latest move from Washington?
Yeah, there's a lot of both, right? This was announced on Wednesday here in Washington. And what we know about the trade agreement is that we're going to see a deeper engagement between the U.S. and Taiwan vis-a-vis digital trade as well as clean energy. This opens the door for a deepening further of ties and really demonstrates Washington's wake-up call that it has gone under during the pandemic, which is to say Washington is terribly dependent, as much of the world is, on Taiwan's semiconductor industry. We've seen a huge impact, of course, on auto production and auto sales here in the United States because of the semiconductor chip shortage. And there's been a realization at the Commerce Department here that they need to work on bilateral relations with Taiwan in terms of economic trade. But of course, the timing is very interesting because it comes on the heels of Tammy Duckworth, a popular senator here in the United States, visit to Taiwan to meet with Tsai Ing-wen. It comes just after U.S. President Joe Biden made remarks in the region saying in a very clear fashion that the U.S. would defend Taiwan militarily.
Right, Jessica. So there's clearly a lot of building tension as of now between the U.S. and China over Taiwan. Is there any effort to cool the tensions down?
There certainly is, and that's going to come at the Shangri-La Dialogue, which is a big defense meeting in Singapore. What we understand now is that we know that Lloyd Austin, the Secretary of Defense of the United States, plans to be there in person. And there has been some indication that Chinese Defense Minister WION-VOA should also be there. It's not confirmed yet that they will meet in person, but we understand from a Wall Street Journal report that there are arrangements being made to have the two leaders meet in person. Of course, their first communication was by phone just in April. But Lloyd Austin has certainly said, Secretary Austin has certainly said that he wants to meet in person in order to ratchet down tensions. But ever since he made those remarks, tensions over Taiwan have only grown.
Right, Jessica, thanks for those inputs. Stay with us on this broadcast. We'll come back to you for your inputs on another story. Let's move on now. The United Nations and the International Monetary Fund have recently warned of a global food shortage due to the Russia-Ukraine war. As we've been reporting, Russia and Ukraine, of course, are two major global exporters of grain. Voice of America recently spoke to Alexandra Vasilenko, the Special Envoy on Coordination of Humanitarian Assistance to the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Ukraine. Take a look.
So the implications of this war will be really hard, and we will feel it not only this year but also in coming years, like 3 up to 5 years at least, because what we're having now. So the war, we already started sowing campaign almost in all regions in Ukraine, but a huge mine contamination. It is very insecure for our farmers to perform sowing campaign, but they already started doing this even in the Zaporizhzhia region, very, very close to the front line. They're using helmet and vest in order to perform their duty. Also, the problem is not only with the sowing campaign. Yes, we have an acute shortage of fuel, which is required for sowing campaign, and it will be required for harvesting. So it definitely will influence the process.
I would say in terms of demining, the problem is really huge, and we're working on the demining problem on different levels with the international organizations and with the government to government, I mean on bilateral level, and EU and NATO countries, they are already providing help. They are sending teams for demining, and I think this process already started and it will unfold really rapidly.
Projections for the harvest for this season in Ukraine are still very high, but as I said before, the situation is really complex with logistics, and we do not know how it will unfold and how we can harvest. So sowing campaign started. We will try to do our best to provide the world with the grain and to keep the world food security.
For more insights, we still have VOA's Jessica Stone with us on this broadcast from Washington, D.C. Jessica, thanks for staying on. Now, President Biden met with the Federal Reserve Chair, Jerome Powell, this week to underscore the fact that he's well aware of the inflation concerns across the country. How big of a political liability is this for him?
A pretty significant one, Priyanka, because he has his lowest approval ratings in the history of his presidency at just 36%. And we're going into a season of midterm elections that could give the control of Congress to the opposing party if the Democrats do not successfully hold their seats. And there are very narrow majorities in the legislative branch of the U.S. government, so particularly in the Senate. So this is a big concern for the White House. It's a big concern as well because inflation's a big issue for voters. It's something they can feel in their pocketbooks. The cost of food, the cost of gas and electricity. These are all really motivating factors for voters around the world, of course. Inflation at a 40-year high in the United States. And the Fed has so far promised to continue to cut rates by 0.5 percentage point each of its meetings in June and July, but the hawks are saying we should keep doing those cuts. The doves are saying we should reevaluate at the end of the summer. And we just got a jobs report that seems strong, which is part of the equation for the Fed. But this is all being very heavily monitored by the White House because inflation is at 8%. And that is quadruple what it should be according to the Fed's mandate.
Right, Jessica, just a final question there. America's energy prices have been hitting record highs of late. Now, we're also learning about this OPEC deal to increase production, oil production. What can you tell us about that?
Well, OPEC has just announced late Thursday night here in the United States, the time, of course, coming from the Middle East, but they've announced that they're going to hike production in both June and July by 648,000 barrels per day in both of those months. This is going to end the historic cuts they were making in output that began in April 2020. And the White House responded immediately to OPEC, saying in a statement, quote, "We recognize the role of Saudi Arabia as the chair of OPEC Plus in achieving consensus." OPEC production, of course, has to calculate in all of the sanctions against Russian oil, which is a major producer of oil, as many as 1 million barrels a day, still off limits to many nations following those U.S. sanctions, and concerns long-term about supply going down as demand goes up from China, because, of course, they are beginning to lift those lockdowns due to COVID-19. Washington has had really strained relations with Riyadh, and on the heels of this announcement from OPEC, we just saw an announcement that U.S. President Joe Biden will return to Saudi Arabia for a visit in the coming weeks. That is also an indication that he will continue to work on this oil and gas issue because, again, it comes down to votes for the White House.
Right, Jessica Stone, thanks so much for all those inputs. Thanks for joining us from Washington with the latest.